The mirror, she made a story told from the wrong side of what happened. I want to tell you something that most people in my position don't tell. Not the version where I was lonely and misunderstood and made a mistake. The version where I was selfish and cowardly and knew exactly what I was doing. That version is harder to tell. It's the only one worth telling. Part 1. The distance. The distance in my marriage was not something that happened to us. I want to say that first, before I say anything else, because the other version, the version where the distance just accumulated like sediment, slowly nobody's fault. The inevitable geology of a long relationship is a comfortable lie that I told myself for 2 years and that I am not going to tell you. The distance in my marriage was something I allowed, something I contributed to, something I at some point stopped trying to close. His name is Marcus. We met when I was 27 at a mutual friend's dinner party in the Fremont neighborhood of Seattle, and he had been sitting at the end of the table with a glass of wine and a quality of focused attention that I found at the time the most attractive thing about him. He wasn't performing for the room. He was listening to the person across from him with genuine interest. And when our host introduced us, and Marcus turned that attention toward me, I remember this clearly, as if I had been handed a spotlight. He was a structural engineer. He came from a family in Portland that had been in the building trades for 3 generations. And he had the specific quality of person who has been around people who build real things and absorb the value of precision and patience. He did not make fast judgments. He did not say things he didn't mean. When he told me 4 months after the dinner party that he was falling in love with me, it was the statement of a person who had evaluated the situation carefully and was reporting his conclusion, not performing a sentiment. I loved him for that. I am telling you this because what happened later is incomprehensible without it. He was a good man. He was in most of the ways that matter. In a daily life, an excellent husband. He showed up. He paid attention to the things he promised to pay attention to. He remembered my sister's birthday and the specific coffee order I gave him once, and the name of my 2nd grade teacher, which I had mentioned exactly once in the context of a story about a science fair. He was present. What he was not increasingly, as the years moved from 2 to 5 to 8, was exciting. I am aware of how that sounds. I am aware that he wasn't exciting is the most cliched and least sympathetic reason a person has ever given for doing what I did. I am telling you anyway, because it is true, and because the truth is the only thing I have left that belongs entirely to me. Our daughter Simone was born in year 4 of the marriage when I was 32. She was the best thing that had ever happened to me, and also in the specific way that new parenthood reorganizes everything the beginning of the period when Marcus and I started talking about logistics more than anything else. Daycare schedules, sleep training, the division of nighttime wake-ups, the ongoing management of a small beloved, completely dependent human being who required everything from both of us and left at the end of each day very little for anything else. We adapted. We were good parents. We were a functional team. What we were not on increasing numbers of evenings was a couple who remembered why they had chosen each other, specifically out of all available options for this specific life. I remember the exact evening I noticed the distance most clearly. Simone was 3. Marcus had come home from a project site, a mixed-use building in South Lake Union that he had been working on for 2 years, and he had looked when he walked through the door. Simultaneously accomplished and exhausted in the way that people look when they have just completed something significant, but have nothing left with which to celebrate it. I had been working all afternoon on a children's arts program curriculum for the non-profit, where I worked as program director, and I was also tired, also spent. We ate dinner. We cleaned up together in the specific practiced efficiency of two people who have been doing the same task in the same space for years. We watched half of something on television. We went to bed. At some point in the night, I woke up, and Marcus was asleep beside me, and the room was quiet, and I lay there thinking, this is my life. This is the shape of my life. And I did not feel grateful, which was what I should have felt. I felt something that I am ashamed to name, which is the sensation of a door closing, slowly, quietly, without drama. I should have told Marcus this. I should have said I am scared that we are becoming people who live beside each other, rather than with each other. I should have asked for what I needed, instead of waiting to be seen and resenting not being seen. I did not do that. I did what I have come to understand in the years since. As my fundamental failure, I waited for something to change while doing nothing to change it. And I accumulated a quiet inventory of grievances, and I told myself the inventory was evidence of something broken rather than a request I hadn't made. And then I met Ryan. Part 2. Ryan. I want to describe Ryan Caldwell carefully because I think the description matters. He was 41, 2 years older than me. He ran a small architecture firm with 2 partners, and his firm had been hired by the arts non-profit where I worked to design a new community centre in the Central District. We met at a planning meeting in March. He was tall, easy in his body, with the particular kind of social confidence that comes from having been interesting in rooms and knowing it not arrogant but unguarded. He laughed quickly. He made eye contact in a way that felt like he was deciding something about you in real time and finding you interesting. He asked me at the end of the planning meeting what I had done before the non-profit. I told him about the arts education work I had been building for 15 years, the curriculum development, the after-school programs, the partnership with the school district. He listened in the specific way that is different from ordinary listening, not waiting for his turn, but actually registering what I said and asking the next question that what I said warranted. When was the last time someone had asked me a question about my work that was actually curious rather than polite? I cannot tell you. It had been long enough that the difference was physically noticeable. We had coffee after the meeting to continue the conversation about the community centre design. Then lunch the following week about the same thing. Then a series of email exchanges that started professionally and became incrementally something else, the kind of correspondence that has the form of professional exchange and the undertow of something more. I told myself it was intellectual friendship. I told myself it was appropriate. I told myself these things, the way you tell yourself things you know are not entirely true, but that you need to believe badly enough to maintain the telling. Marcus asked once in June who Ryan was. I had mentioned the name in connection with the community centre project. He's the lead architect on the Central District build, I said. Smart guy, good at his job. Marcus looked up from his book. You've mentioned him a few times. He's been central to the project, I said. It's a big project. Marcus nodded and went back to his book. His attention returned to his book, and I stood in the kitchen feeling the specific sick warmth of a person who has just been given an easy out they didn't deserve. I took it. I always took the easy out. That is the honest description of what I did for the next 4 months. I took every available easy out and told myself that taking the easy out was not making a choice. By September, I was meeting Ryan once a week, outside of work contexts. By October, those meetings had changed in the way that meetings change when two people have been not quite saying something for long enough that the not saying becomes its own statement. I will not describe the specifics of what happened in October, because they are not the point, and because they belong to the worst version of myself, and I have spent enough time there. What I will say is that I knew at every step what I was doing. I was not swept away. I was not in the grip of something larger than myself. I was making decisions one at a time, small ones that accumulated into a large one, and I made each small decision with full awareness of what it was building toward. I knew. I kept going anyway. That is the true story. Part 3. The Inventory. I became in the months after October a person I would not have recognized at 27. I built an inventory of Marcus's failures. Not in a notebook in my head, the running mental ledger that I maintained and updated and reviewed late at night when I couldn't sleep. He worked too much. He was emotionally unavailable in ways I couldn't specify precisely, but could feel. He had stopped noticing me in the specific ways that used to matter. He was more interested in the South Lake Union project than in the quality of our evenings. Some of these things were partially true. Some were constructed from real grievances that I had distorted through the lens of what I needed them to be. All of them served the same function. They were the case I was building against my husband in order to justify the case I was building with someone else. I need to say that plainly, because I spent a long time not saying it plainly, even to myself. The inventory was not an honest assessment of Marcus. It was a legal brief with a predetermined verdict. Here is what the honest version of the inventory would have contained. Marcus had become more focused on work in the past 3 years. This was partly because the South Lake Union project was the most significant of his career and required a level of engagement that left less available for everything else. It was also partly because I had given him no indication that I needed more from him. I had been, during the same period, increasingly self-contained, increasingly in my own head, increasingly directing my emotional energy toward Ryan rather than toward the man I had married. He had stopped initiating the kind of connection that used to happen organically. This was true. It was also true that I had stopped responding to his attempts in ways that would have encouraged more of them. I had been, without announcing it, slowly withdrawing my availability, and he had, without naming it, adjusted to the available territory. We had both been failing at our marriage. The difference was that he had been failing through inattention, and I had been failing through active deception. One of those failures can be addressed. The other requires a completely different kind of reckoning. Simone was 4 by then. She had her father's eyes and his patience and his specific gift for paying full attention to whatever was directly in front of her. She went through a period that winter of drawing elaborate maps of the house, of the neighborhood, of the park 3 blocks away. She left them on the kitchen table in the mornings, and Marcus always looked at them carefully and told her specific things about what she had drawn well. I watched this once from the kitchen doorway. Marcus at the table, Simone beside him, both of them bent over her latest map. They looked alike in that moment, the tilt of the head, the way they both traced something with a finger before speaking. I felt watching them a specific and terrible thing. I have no right to any of this. I went back to the kitchen and made coffee and said nothing, and the feeling passed, and I added another item to the inventory, and I kept going. That is the person I was for 9 months. I am not going to soften it. Part 4. The Shift. Marcus changed in February. Not dramatically. Not suddenly. He started coming home earlier. Not every day. Not in a way that announced itself as a change in pattern, just incrementally more present in the evenings. He made dinner twice a week. He asked Simone about school with a focused interest that seemed to have increased in its intensity. He also started asking me different questions. Not, how was your day? Specific questions. What was the status of the Central District project? How had the grant application gone? He asked about Ryan by name once, casually. How's the architecture firm guy doing on the design? Ryan, was it? Fine, I said. On schedule. Good, he said, and went back to what he was reading. But his eyes had held mine for a fraction of a second longer than the question required. I deleted every text from Ryan that night. I started using a secondary app for our communication. I deleted my call history every evening. I stopped meeting Ryan at any location connected to my professional life. The paranoia was exhausting. The dahlias appeared on Saturday mornings, a bunch from the market that Marcus put in the kitchen window without comment. I noticed every flower. I resented every flower. They made the inventory harder to maintain. Ryan noticed the change in my mood and asked what was wrong. I told him nothing was wrong, that I had just been tired and stressed. He pulled me toward him and said I seemed distant. I remember thinking in that moment, you have no idea what distance looks like. Part 5. What Marcus knew, he knew. I do not know exactly when he knew, or how much he knew, or at what point the knowing became certainty rather than suspicion. What I know is that by the time he showed me, by the time I understood the full picture of what he had been doing while I had been building my inventory, he had been operating with complete knowledge for at least 3 months. I found this out on a Saturday morning in April. Simone was at my mother's house in Bellevue. Marcus had arranged this 2 weeks earlier, suggesting casually that Simone would love to spend the weekend with Grandma. My mother had been asking. The arrangement was genuine. The timing was also, I now understand, chosen. I came downstairs to find Marcus already at the kitchen table with coffee and a folder. He waited until I had poured my coffee and sat down across from him. And then he opened the folder and laid 3 photographs on the table between us. They were taken outside a restaurant on Capitol Hill. Ryan and I had met there 4 times in the fall. In the 3rd photograph, taken in the alley beside the restaurant, I was being kissed. I looked at the photographs for a long time. Then I looked at Marcus. He looked back at me with the expression I had been seeing in fragments for months, fully assembled now. Not anger, not grief, not the theatrical betrayal of a man who has been surprised. Something much quieter and much more final. There are more, he said. That's the summary version. I didn't say anything. I have records of your calls, he said. His voice was even. He might have been describing a project specification. Not the content, just the frequency and duration going back to September. I have the location data from the app you switched to, which is not as secure as you believed it was. I have a statement from someone who works at the architect firm. And I have a recording. My chest went cold. From our house, he said. From a conversation you had on the phone in November in the kitchen while I was working upstairs. You said that I was the kind of man who had stopped seeing you as a person and started seeing you as a piece of the household. You said that being with Ryan made you remember that you were someone who deserved to be fully present in her own life. He paused. You also said that you had been managing me, and that as long as I was managed, you had room. He picked up his coffee cup and took a sip. I want to ask you something, Marcus said, and I need you to understand that I am not asking because I don't know the answer. I'm asking because I think you should have to say it out loud to me in this room after 9 months of not saying anything at all. He looked at me directly. Are you having an affair with Ryan Caldwell? I looked at my husband across the kitchen table. He had the same eyes. He had always had the eyes I had noticed at the dinner party in Fremont 12 years ago. They were giving me their full attention now. There was nowhere to go in that attention. It was the most complete being seen I had felt in years, and it was because of everything I had done, the worst possible version of it. Yes, I said. He nodded once, as if confirming something he had already entered in a ledger. Thank you, he said. I needed to hear you say it. Part 6, the terms. He laid out what he had completely and without drama, and then he laid out what he intended to do with it. The documentation was extensive. 14 months of material assembled with the specific methodical patience of a structural engineer. The photographs, the call records, the location data, the recording, financial records showing expenditures I had described as work-related lunches, a statement from someone at Ryan's firm, and emails, the early professional ones from the spring and summer, in which I had described Marcus in terms I had believed were accurate analysis, and that I now understood were a composite portrait assembled from the worst available angles. He had printed several of them and set them in the folder. I read the emails with the specific horror of someone reading a document they wrote and cannot now claim authorship of. You reduced me, he said quietly. Not to a villain. You reduced me to a type. The reliable, somewhat dull provider. The man who manages things. He looked at the emails. It's easier to leave a type, harder to leave a person. I did not argue with this because it was accurate. What do you want? I asked. I want a divorce, he said. I want Simone to live with me primarily because she has stability with me that she will not have with you in the short term, given the disruption of what you're about to go through. I want the house because I built equity in this house, and I want Simone to stay in her school and her neighborhood without disruption. He paused. I want you to have full access to Simone, full Clara, not supervised, not conditional. She loves you. That doesn't change what you did. But I am not going to use her to punish you, because she is not a mechanism. I had been braced for the custody threat, the asset stripping, the public release of the documentation. I had been planning how to fight each of those things. I had not been prepared for generosity. For the moment when the man I had underestimated and diminished in my own internal ledger demonstrated without performance that he had maintained the entire time the quality I had claimed he had lost. The documentation, I said. Are you going to? No, he said. Not unless you force me to. I don't want to do that to Simone. I don't want her to know when she's old enough to understand it, that her father destroyed her mother's reputation because he had the leverage to do so. He looked at me steadily. That's not who I am. You know that. You always knew that. I did know that. I had always known that. I had relied on it, the specific reliability of his decency, while convincing myself he didn't see me. What do you get? I asked. He looked at me for a long moment. I get the truth, he said, and I get to stop pretending nothing is wrong. Part 7, Simone. Here is the part I cannot tell without stopping. Simone was 4 years old. She had her father's eyes and his quality of attention and the specific grace of a child who has been fully loved in her early years. She drew maps. She had been drawing them since she could hold a pencil, maps of the house, of our street, of the park, of the walk to school. She taped them to the refrigerator and explained them to anyone who looked with the seriousness of a cartographer presenting significant findings. She called the marks she used for important places the important dots. The week before I moved out, Simone drew a new map. It was the most detailed she had ever made, the whole neighborhood, every important dot labeled in her careful 6-year-old printing. At the bottom, in a corner, she had drawn 2 figures side by side with connecting lines between their important dots. She labeled one figure Daddy and one figure Mama. She taped it to the refrigerator without explaining it and went back to her breakfast. Marcus and I looked at the map from across the kitchen separately, each pretending to be doing something else. I do not believe Simone knew what was happening. Children know things without having the words for them, and she had been watching both of us with the specific, careful attention she brought to everything. The map, I think, was her way of locating herself in the change, placing the important dots in their positions and drawing the lines between them. Because the lines being there made the dots real. Looking at that map, I felt the full weight of what I had done for the first time without the cushion of self-justification. Not the photographs, not the documentation, not Marcus's voice describing what he had assembled. This, a map made by a 4-year-old who had connected the dots between her parents and needed them to be there. I did not say anything to Marcus. I took my coffee and went upstairs and closed the door and sat in the corner of our bedroom with my back against the wall, and I stayed there for 2 hours. Then I came back downstairs and started packing. Part 8. What Marcus sacrificed. He had the documentation. 14 months of material assembled with the specific thoroughness of a structural engineer. He could have used it to construct a case in family court that would have been catastrophic for me. The emails alone with my characterizations of his parenting and his emotional presence could have been submitted as evidence of a maternal attitude incompatible with primary custody. The financial records could have been framed as a pattern of marital waste. The photographs could have been used to establish moral character arguments. He did none of this. He used the documentation once to show me what he had, to ensure that I understood the full picture. Once. Then he put it away. He filed for divorce on grounds of irreconcilable differences. He accepted an asset division that his attorney described as more favorable to me than the documentation would have required him to offer. He insisted on the access arrangement that gave me full, unconditional time with Simone. Because, as he said to his attorney, she loves her mother, and her mother loves her, and that is not contingent on her mother's behavior toward me. I have thought about this sacrifice often. I think it was Marcus choosing not to become someone he wasn't. He had the leverage to destroy me, and he didn't use it, not because he had forgiven me, but because using it would have required him to be someone whose tools are other people's suffering. He was not that person. He had never been that person. He chose, in the aftermath of the worst thing that had happened to him, to remain himself. That is the thing I reduced when I called him boring in those emails. I reduced the quality of a person who maintains his own integrity even when he has every justification to abandon it. That quality has a name that is not exciting. It is called character. I had been married to it for 12 years and had not understood what I had. I understood it in the year after I moved out. I understood it in the specific way that you understand something you have destroyed completely accurately too late. Part 9. The apartment and what came after. I have been living in the Capitol Hill apartment for 2 years. It is a one-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a building on 15th Avenue, with a window that faces east and gets good morning light that I am there to see, because I do not sleep well and have not slept well since this became the shape of my life. I have furnished it slowly and carefully, partly because I had limited resources in the first year, and partly because I could not make myself fill the space quickly. I am not at home in it. I am present in it, which is different. Ryan and I stopped seeing each other 3 weeks after I moved out. The termination of the affair had the quality that I think most affairs have when removed from the context that sustained them. It deflated rather than broke. He was kind about it. I did not want his kindness. I see Simone on Tuesdays and Thursdays after school and every other weekend. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I pick her up from her after-school program, which is at the school 2 blocks from the house she shares with Marcus. And we walk to a coffee shop on the corner, and she shows me her latest projects, and we talk until Marcus picks her up at 6:30. The handoffs are brief and civil. The maps are still happening. She is 6 now, and the maps have become more complex. She has started incorporating distance and scale, asking Marcus to help her measure things so her maps are accurate. The important dots have proliferated her classroom, her best friend, Isabel's house, the coffee shop where she and I go on Tuesdays, the apartment building on 15th Avenue where her mother lives. They are all on the map. I am still an important dot. I do not know what I did to deserve that. I know what I did to not deserve it. The distance between those two things is where I am currently living. Part 10. What I know now. I want to tell you what I know now that I did not know before. I know that loneliness in a marriage is real and serious and deserves to be addressed. I know that the addressing requires saying the true thing to the person you are lonely with, rather than saying it to someone outside the marriage who has no obligation to help you address it. I know that I had a husband who was available for the addressing, and that I chose at every available opportunity not to address it. I know that the inventory I maintained was not honest accounting. It was a prosecution brief. I distorted real grievances into an indictment and used the indictment to absolve myself of the obligation to try. I know that "he doesn't see me" is a sentence that means different things depending on how you complete it. If you complete it with "so I am going to leave" or "I am going to ask him to see me differently," it is a complete thought and possibly a useful one. If you complete it with "so I am going to find someone who does" while continuing to live here and say nothing, it is neither. I know that what I called being seen by Ryan was not being seen. It was being reflected. He showed me the version of myself that I needed to see. That version was not false exactly. There were real elements of me in it, but it was assembled from selected evidence and optimized for a specific purpose. And the purpose was to justify what I was already doing, rather than to help me understand anything true about myself. The only person who showed me the true version of myself was Marcus. On a Saturday morning in April, with photographs on the kitchen table, and his voice even, and his eyes the same eyes they had always been. He held up the full picture and let me see it. That was being seen. It was the worst morning of my life, and it was the only morning I had been fully seen in years. I know that the distance in my marriage was not something that happened to me. It was something I allowed and contributed to and stopped trying to address. The affair was not a response to the distance, but an avoidance of the conversation that might have closed it. I know that Marcus is a good man. Not in the abstract as a specific, accurate assessment of a specific person. He is patient and precise and structurally sound in the way that good things are. I know that I spent 2 years building a case that he lacked this quality, and the case was wrong. I know that Simone is going to be all right. She has a father who shows up and a mother who is trying to show up, and the specific resilience of a child who has been loved correctly in her early years. She still draws maps. The important dots are still there. I am still on them. Part 11. Marcus, honestly. He started a firm. Not the previous employer, his own firm. Whitfield Structural LLC. He announced it on LinkedIn 6 months after I moved out. I saw it and sat with it for a long time because the post was characteristic of him in all the ways the inventory I had maintained was not straightforward, precise, confident, without performing confidence. Describing something real in the language of someone who understood what they had built. The South Lake Union project had been his last with the previous employer. Its completion, the building opened in November, was the natural ending point for that chapter. He took Simone to the opening. She drew the building that weekend from photographs Marcus had taken. She added it to the neighborhood map in its correct position relative to the other important dots. And she put a star next to it. I know about the star because Simone told me about the opening when I picked her up the following Tuesday. She described the building with the specific detail she brought to everything, the height, the courtyard at the base, the way the upper floors were set back to let light into the street. "Daddy said you'd like it," she said at one point. I asked her why. She looked at me with the assessing quality she has always had. "He said you always believed he could build something good if he had the chance." I looked at her, my daughter with her father's eyes. "He was right," I said. She nodded, satisfied, and went back to her drawing. I sat in the coffee shop after she left with Marcus at 6:30, and I stayed there until they closed at 9 because there was nowhere I needed to be, and because the evening had a quality that required sitting with it. I had believed he could build something good. I had said so early in the marriage, in the first years, when we still said that kind of thing to each other. Somewhere in the decade that followed, I had stopped saying it, and then I had stopped believing it, and then I had replaced the belief with the inventory. He had been building something good the whole time. He had never stopped. The building was real, and the star on Simone's map was real, and the comment to our daughter was the most generous thing anyone had said about me in 2 years. I do not know if Marcus and I will find our way to something other than functional civility. I am not writing this hoping we will, because hope in that direction feels like an entitlement I have not earned. What I have is the honest version of what happened, and the honest version of what it cost, and the honest version of who he is and who I was when I was at my worst. He is the man who closed the door softly, not with anger, not with performance, with the specific finality of someone who had finished something and was ready for the next thing. I am the woman who drove away from it. I have been trying ever since to figure out what I am driving toward. I have not arrived yet, but I know the road now. I know where I got off course. I know the turn I missed. I know what it cost. And I know that the next map I draw will have all the important dots in their real positions, not the positions I needed them to be in. That is not enough. It is what I have. It is what I will work with. Starting here. Starting now. The end. Cast of characters. Clara Whitfield, Arts Program Director, Seattle, 39. 12 years of marriage, 1 daughter, 1 affair, 1 apartment on 15th Avenue. The person who tells this story rather than the person the story is usually told about. Still looking at the mirror. Marcus Whitfield, structural engineer, founding principal of Whitfield Structural, LLC. 41. Patient, precise, methodical. The kind of man who assembles documentation the way he assembles buildings thoroughly from the foundation up without drama. He closed the door softly. He built something good. Ryan Caldwell, architect, 41. He was the mirror at the wrong angle. He reflected the version of Clara she needed to see. He was not a person in this story so much as a function, and when the function ended, so did he. Simone Whitfield, Clara and Marcus's daughter, 4, then 6. Draws maps, marks important dots, has her father's eyes, is on the map, will be all right. The important dots, all of them. The kitchen, her bedroom, the maple tree, the coffee shop, the apartment on 15th Avenue, Daddy's building with the star. All real, all on the map. Part 12. The sister conversation. My sister Isabel called me on a Wednesday evening in May 3 weeks after I moved out. Isabel is 3 years older than me and lives in Portland with her husband and 2 children. And she and I have the specific relationship that exists between sisters who are not close enough to say the hard things to each other easily and not distant enough to avoid saying them entirely. She had known about the divorce I had told her, the sanitized version, the one where Marcus and I had grown apart, where the marriage had become a logistical arrangement, where we were both good people who had arrived at a place where continuing was not working. The version that made me the protagonist of a sad but uncomplicated story. She had accepted this version. She had been kind about it. She had said the things sisters say, that I deserved to be happy, that the children of unhappy marriages suffer, that sometimes the right decision is the hard one. I had let her say those things. I had not corrected her. On the Wednesday evening in May, she called because Simone had said something at Grandma's house during a recent visit that Isabel had heard about through our mother. She didn't lead with it. She started with how I was doing the apartment, the adjustment. Then, after 10 minutes of circling, she said, Mom said Simone asked her whether Daddy was sad. I was quiet. She said Simone asked her if it was her fault. I put the phone against my chest for a moment. Then I brought it back to my ear. She said Mom told her it wasn't her fault, Isabel continued. And Simone said, but Daddy's building is on my map, and Mama's apartment is on my map, and they're in different places, and I can't make the line go the right way. I sat in the chair by the east-facing window for a long time after that. Clara, Isabel said, what actually happened? I told her. The real version. Not the sanitized one, the full one, the way I am telling it here, because Isabel was the first person I told the real version to, and telling the real version to her was the beginning of understanding that the real version was the only one worth carrying. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. Why didn't you tell him? She said finally. Not about Ryan. Earlier, why didn't you tell Marcus you were lonely? Because I didn't know how, I said. Because I had spent 2 years building a case that it was his fault, and if I told him I was lonely, I would have to dismantle the case and be the one asking for something. And asking for something meant being vulnerable, and being vulnerable meant being possibly rejected. And rejection from someone you love is, I stopped. is what Isabel said, is more frightening than an affair, I said. That's the true thing. The affair was easier than the honest conversation. That's how far I had gotten from the person I thought I was. Isabel was quiet for a moment longer. Then she said, "You know what you need to do." I did know. I had known since the morning on the kitchen floor, looking at the photographs. "I know," I said. "Not for Marcus," she said. "For Simone. And for whoever you're going to be next." We talked for another hour then. Not about the affair or the divorce, about what came next. What asking for help looked like. What accountability looked like from the inside. What it meant to build something honest after having built something false. It was the most useful conversation I had had in 2 years. It was available the whole time. I had been choosing the wrong conversations. Part 13. The Therapist. I started seeing a therapist named Dr. Elaine Morrow in June, 2 months after moving out. I am including this not because the therapy is the point of the story, but because the therapy is where I understood the inventory, where I finally saw the ledger for what it was, rather than what I had needed it to be. Dr. Morrow was 62, with the specific unhurried quality of a person who has been in rooms with people at their worst for a long time and has arrived at a place where the worst is simply information rather than emergency. She did not tell me what I had done was wrong. I already knew what I had done was wrong. She asked me questions about why. Not why in the sense of what drove me to the affair. She was not interested in cataloguing my grievances against Marcus, and she told me early in our work that if I wanted to use the sessions to build a better case for myself, she was not the right person for that project. She was interested in the prior why I had allowed the distance to accumulate for 2 years without addressing it, why I had maintained the inventory instead of making the request, why being seen by someone who had no investment in my actual life had felt safer than being seen by the person who had invested 12 years in it. The answer, when I arrived at it, was not complicated. It was small and embarrassing and specific. I had been afraid that Marcus would look at me honestly and find me insufficient, not because he had given me any reason to believe he thought this. He had not. He had consistently, over 12 years, given me the specific attention of a person who found the person he was attending to valuable and interesting. He had remembered the second-grade teacher's name. He had shown up for the things I needed him to show up for. He had been present in all the ways that matter in a daily life. I was afraid anyway. Not because of Marcus, because of something I had been carrying into the marriage from long before Marcus, about whether the version of myself that asked for things rather than managing without them was the version that people stayed for, or the version that drove them away. My mother had been a person who managed without asking. My father had left anyway. That is the original story that the inventory was downstream of. I am not telling this as an explanation of my behavior, because it does not explain it. What I did was wrong regardless of what I was afraid of. And my fear was not Marcus's responsibility to manage, and he was not required to perform the reassurance that would have addressed it. What I am telling you is the why I found in therapy. The small, embarrassing, specific thing at the foundation of the 2 years of building cases and maintaining inventory and choosing the easy out. I was afraid to ask for what I needed, because I was afraid the asking would cost me what I had. I chose instead to build the conditions under which I would lose it. That is the kind of logic that looks from inside it like self-preservation. It isn't. Dr. Morrow asked me in our 7th session, What I would say to Marcus if I had one conversation available to me. Not the conversation I had on the Saturday morning in April, but the conversation I should have had 2 years before that. I told her I would say, I am scared we are becoming roommates who like each other, and I don't know how to stop that from happening, and I need you to not wait for me to seem okay with it. He would have heard that, she said. I know, I said. Why didn't you say it? Because I had already started building the case, I said. And the case was easier. What's easier about a case than a conversation? A case doesn't require me to be wrong, I said. A conversation might. Part 14. Isabel's daughter, my niece Petra, is 8 years old. She came to visit me in the Capitol Hill apartment in August with Isabel, and she walked through the apartment with the focused assessment of a child deciding what she thought about something, and then she said, "It's small." "It is small," I agreed. "But you have a nice window." "I do have a nice window." She looked at the window for a moment, then at me. "Simone showed me her map," she said. "The one with your apartment on it." "I know about that map," I said. "She said your dot is yellow," Petra said. "She uses different colors for different people. Daddy's dot is blue because he likes blue. Her dot is purple. Your dot is yellow." "Why yellow?" I asked. Petra looked at me with the specific directness of an 8-year-old who is reporting information without editorial overlay. She said, "Because you're always trying to be the light in the room." I looked at my niece. "That's what she said," Petra confirmed. I asked her what she meant, and she said that when you're sad, you try to make other people feel better, and that's what trying to be the light means. I sat down at the kitchen table. Petra went to the window to look at the view. "Do you think she's right?" she asked from the window. "I think she sees things clearly," I said. "Her mum does too," Petra said, meaning Simone's mum, meaning me in the straightforward way that children refer to people. "Isabel says so." I looked at my niece at the window with the Seattle view behind her and the morning light on her face, and I thought about the yellow dot on Simone's map. A 6-year-old had been watching her mother try to be the light in the room, and had named it and mapped it and kept it in the important dots. I had been trying to be the light in the room while dimming every room I was actually in. That is the complete picture, not the photographs, not the documentation, not Marcus's voice in the kitchen even and final, not the emails I couldn't claim. The yellow dot on Simone's map, and what it meant about who my daughter saw when she looked at me, and how far that person was from who I had been for 2 years, and how much work lay between who I had been and who the yellow dot deserved to come from. I am doing the work. That is all I can tell you. I am doing the work, and the apartment on 15th Avenue has a nice window, and Simone's important dot is still yellow, and that is the thing I am building toward. It is not enough to fix what I broke. It is enough to build something honest on the other side of it. The mirror shows me the truth every morning. I am still looking. That at the end of all of it is the beginning. Postscript 3 things. 3 things I know about Marcus that I did not let myself know during the 2 years I was building the case against him. 1. He cried the night I moved out. I know this because Simone told me without knowing she was telling me something significant, that Daddy cried when Mama's car drove away, and that she held his hand until he stopped. She was 4 years old. She held her father's hand until he stopped crying, because that is the kind of child she is, which is the kind of person Marcus helped make. and the kind of person I had been too occupied elsewhere to fully see. 2. He kept the dahlias. Every Saturday after I moved out, he kept putting dahlias in the kitchen window. Not because I was there to see them, just because. Simone mentioned this too, the way children mention the details of their lives that have become normal to them. Daddy always gets the yellow ones now. He knows you like yellow. 3. He said when I asked him once during the mediation process why he had not used the documentation the way he could have the thing I told you earlier about not wanting to be someone whose tools are other people's suffering. And then he said one more thing that I did not include earlier because I needed to arrive here before I could include it. He said, I built a life with you and I watched it break, and I am not going to build something ugly on top of that. He built Whitfield Structural instead and put dahlias in the window and held his daughter's hand. That is who I was married to. That is what the mirror shows me. I am still looking. Part 15. The Community Centre. The Central District Community Centre opened in October. I had not planned to go. The project had been completed by Ryan's firm while I was still at the non-profit, and I had left the organisation in July. The combination of the divorce and the affair, and the specific complexity of continuing to work on a project whose architect had been the other half of the reason my marriage ended, was too much to manage from inside the organisation. I left on good terms. My executive director wrote me a generous reference. The curriculum I had built over 4 years was intact and running. I gave the Central District Community Centre away the way you give away something you built, but can no longer hold. The opening was a public event. The neighbourhood had been waiting for the building for 3 years. My former colleagues were there. Some of the families whose children would use the arts programs were there. Ryan was there. I could see him from across the room talking to someone from the city council, his particular easy social confidence undiminished. I went because Simone asked me to. She had heard about the opening from school. The community centre was 1 block from her school, which meant she passed it every day and had been watching it rise from the ground for the past year. She had been drawing it into her maps since the framing went up. She wanted to see inside the finished building. I took her on a Saturday afternoon. We walked through the art spaces on the 2nd floor, the pottery room, the music room, the open painting studio with the north-facing skylights that I had specified in the program brief 3 years ago, and that Ryan's firm had executed exactly as I had envisioned. Simone stood in the painting studio and looked up at the skylights. This is where you worked, she said. The program started in this building, I said. I helped plan what the rooms would be used for. She looked around the room carefully, the way she looked at everything, the specific assessing quality that was entirely her own, and also, I have come to understand, not entirely unlike mine. She looked at the north-facing light coming through the skylights, the way it filled the room without shadows. It's good light, she said. It is good light, I said. She pulled out the small notebook she had started carrying everywhere, the one she used for sketching before she transferred things to her formal maps. She sketched the room quickly, marking where the light came from, where the easels would go, where the door was. Then she looked up at me. Your important dot is in here, she said. Even though you don't work here anymore. I looked at my daughter in the painting studio of the building I had helped plan in the light I had asked for that now belonged to the neighborhood it was built for. She had found my dot in it without being told it was there. Yes, I said, my important dot is in here. She added something to the sketch in her notebook. I didn't ask what. She closed it and put it in her pocket. We walked home through the October afternoon. She held my hand the last block, which she didn't always do anymore. She had turned 6 in September and had opinions about what was babyish, but she held my hand on the last block, and I held it back. That is the moment I have come back to the most in the evenings in the Capitol Hill apartment. Not the photographs, not the kitchen table, not even the map with the yellow dot, the October afternoon, and the light in the painting studio, and my daughter's hand in mine on the last block home. There was an important dot there. She found it. I intend to be worthy of it. Part 16. What the mirror shows. I get up every morning in the apartment on 15th Avenue, and I make coffee and I look at the east-facing window while the light comes in. And I think about the question I should have asked Marcus 2 years before the Saturday in April. I am scared we are becoming roommates who like each other, and I need you to not wait for me to seem okay with it. I think about that question every morning because it is the question I did not ask, and not asking it is where the 2 years began. Not with Ryan. Ryan was the consequence. The cause was the question I swallowed every night before bed and replaced with an item in the inventory. Loneliness in a marriage is real. I want to say that again because I think it needs to be said without qualification. Loneliness in a marriage is real. It hurts, it matters, and it deserves to be addressed. It is not a frivolous complaint. It is not the cliched dissatisfaction of a woman who has a good life and doesn't appreciate it. It is a specific kind of pain that comes from being in proximity to the person you chose and feeling the distance between you, and it is the kind of pain that does not improve with silence. What I know now is that the appropriate response to that pain is not to maintain a case file against the person you are lonely with. It is not to find someone outside the marriage who will confirm the case file. It is to say the true thing to the person you are lonely with as early as possible, before the distance becomes the default, before the inventory becomes the substitute for the conversation. I did not say the true thing. I did the other things instead. I know now what they cost. The mirror shows me this every morning. The woman looking back at me is not the woman in the emails assembling the case file, managing the situation, and calling it intelligence. She is also not the woman at 27 who had been handed a spotlight and had felt for the first time fully seen. She is the woman who is trying imperfectly to build something honest from the materials that remain. The materials are one apartment on 15th Avenue with a good east window. One daughter who draws maps and marks important dots and chose yellow for her mother because she thinks her mother is always trying to be the light in the room. One man who built a firm and kept dahlias in the kitchen window and held his daughter's hand until he stopped crying. One sister who asked the right question. One therapist who asked the next one. One painting studio with north-facing skylights in a community center that exists partly because I specified those skylights 3 years ago. Those are the materials. I am working with them. Every morning the light comes through the east window. I make my coffee. I sit with the question I should have asked and the answer I am still building. The important dots are real. The lines between them are real. The map is honest. I'm trying to be worthy of being on it. That is where I am. That is all of it. Done. Part 17, the maps. Simone gave me a map for my birthday. Not a copy of one of her neighborhood maps, a new one made specifically for the occasion. She presented it on a Tuesday afternoon at the coffee shop, folded in a small envelope with my name on it in her careful printing. I opened it at the table with her watching. It was a map of the things she wanted me to know were mine. The coffee shop labelled with my name and hers. The painting studio in the community centre. The east-facing window at the apartment on 15th Avenue. The route from the apartment to her school, which she had marked as a pathway rather than a boundary. At the centre of the map, in the position she normally reserved for the most important dot, she had drawn a figure. The figure was labelled Mama. Around the figure, at equal distances, she had placed all the other dots, connected by lines that she had drawn carefully in the specific, deliberate way she drew all important things. The lines were not straight. She had curved them slightly, the way rivers curve on real maps, in the way that the world is not a grid, but a series of paths that bend toward what matters. "What does the curved line mean?" I asked. She looked at the map with the assessing quality she always brought to her own work. "It means the path goes the way it has to go," she said. "Not the straight way, the real way." I looked at the map. My daughter had drawn me at the center of a map that included every important thing she knew about my life, and she had connected them all to me with lines that acknowledged the path had not been straight. She had put me at the center anyway. I have the map framed on the wall of the apartment next to the east-facing window. I look at it in the mornings when the light comes in. The path goes the way it has to go. Not the straight way, the real way. That is what the mirror shows me now. Not the photographs, not the inventory, not the emails I cannot claim. My daughter's map and the curved lines and the east-facing light. I am on the path. That is enough for today. Tomorrow I will be on the path again. That is how it works the real way. That is all. Part 18. The honest accounting. I want to do one more accounting, the final one before I close. What? I had a husband who showed up, a daughter who draws the people she loves onto maps so she knows where they are. A marriage that was colder than it needed to be because I did not ask for what I needed. A professional life that was genuinely meaningful, and a life that was by any objective measure substantial and good. What I told myself, I had all of the above, minus the warmth I needed, and plus a growing inventory of evidence that the warmth was Marcus's failure rather than a shared communication problem. What I did found, someone who reflected the version of me that needed to be reflected, told myself the reflection was intimacy, maintained the deception for 9 months with full awareness of its cost, and watched my husband assemble the evidence of it with the same patient methodology he brought to everything he built. What it cost, the marriage, the house, the daily texture of my daughter's mornings and evenings, the version of myself that I had believed was the protagonist of a sympathetic story. What it produced, the true version, the one I am telling here. What I know now, the question I should have asked, and why I didn't, and what the not asking built, and what the asking could have prevented. What I am building something honest, slowly, with the materials that remain. What remains? The apartment, the window, the coffee shop on Tuesdays, the painting studio with north-facing light, the map on the wall, with the curved lines my daughter's yellow dot. What I intend to be worthy of the yellow dot, not through dramatic transformation, through the daily choice to say the true thing before the silence builds into an inventory, and the inventory builds into a case, and the case builds into something neither person in the room can stop. That is the lesson, not an exciting one, the right one. I got it wrong. I know exactly how. I know the first wrong turn, and the second, and the point at which the turns accumulated into a direction. I am going in a different direction now. Slowly, honestly, with a map that has the important dots in their real positions. The light comes through the east window every morning. I make my coffee. I look at the map on the wall. I start again. Part 19. The full picture. Dr. Morrow asked me in our 13th session what I would tell someone who was currently in the position I had been in, someone who was lonely in their marriage, who had met someone who paid them the kind of attention they needed, who was standing at the moment just before the decision. I thought about it for a long time. I told her I would say 3 things. First, the loneliness is real. Do not let anyone, including yourself, minimize it, dismiss it, or suggest you should simply be grateful for what you have. The loneliness is a signal, and signals deserve to be taken seriously. Second, the signal is pointing at a conversation you have not had with your partner, not at an exit that bypasses the conversation. The attention of someone outside the marriage feels like being seen, because it is not confused by the accumulated history of the marriage, the annoyances, the shortfalls, the ways in which you are less than your best self in front of the person who knows you best. That clarity is not intimacy. It is the absence of intimacy's complications. Real intimacy includes the complications. Third, the conversation is frightening. It requires you to say, I need something I am not getting, which is the same as saying I am insufficient in this marriage, which might feel like weakness and might feel like an admission that could be used against you and might feel like the kind of vulnerability that drives people away. It is not weakness. It is the only way through. The affair is an avoidance of the conversation, and it is an avoidance that costs exactly what you are trying to protect. Dr. Morrow wrote something in her notebook. Then she looked up. Would you have listened? She asked. I thought about standing in the kitchen at 37 with the inventory running in my head and Ryan's number in my phone and Marcus upstairs working on specifications for the South Lake Union building that would turn out to be the most significant project of his career. No, I said honestly. I was too far into the case. What would have reached you? I thought about that for a long time. If someone had asked me what I was afraid of, I said, not what I was angry at, what I was afraid of. If someone had cut through the inventory to the fear underneath it. What were you afraid of? That he would look at me honestly and not want to stay, I said. That the real version of me, the one who needed things and wasn't managing, and wasn't the person in his portfolio who was well maintained and valuable, was the version that would make him leave. He didn't leave, she said. No, I said. I did. That is the full picture. Not dramatic. Not the version of itself that makes either party entirely villain or entirely hero. The version where 2 people who loved each other failed at a specific and correctable thing, and where one of the people chose a correction that destroyed what remained rather than asking for the repair it actually needed. I chose wrong. I know exactly how I chose wrong. That is not the same as having chosen right. It is the beginning of choosing differently. That is what the mirror shows. Every morning, the light through the east window, the map on the wall, the important dots, the curved lines, the yellow dot at the center. I am still here. I am still on the map. I intend to be worthy of that every day, starting now, starting again. That is all. That is everything. That is the story. Part 20. What Marcus said at the door. I told you earlier that Marcus said one thing when I was loading the last box into my car that I have not yet included. I told you I needed to arrive here first. I have arrived here. He stopped me as I opened the car door. I had been carrying a box of books, mind the ones I had brought to the marriage from the apartment I had before. The ones I had marked with my name in the front covers when I was 25, and believed that marking your name in things was how you kept them yours. He said, I want you to know one thing. I stopped. I held the box of books. I never stopped trying to see you, he said. I know that's not what you believed. I know the inventory you were keeping. I could feel the inventory, even when I didn't know what was in it. I know I got quieter in the hard years, and I know I let the work take more than it should have taken. He looked at me steadily. But I never stopped trying to see you. I want you to know that. Not because it changes anything, because it's true. I stood at the car door with the box of books. I know, I said. I know you didn't stop. Then why? He started. Because I was afraid you'd stop, I said. And I couldn't say that. And so I found someone else instead of saying that. And I am sorry. He looked at me for a long moment. The morning light was on the street behind him, and the dahlias were in the kitchen window inside the house, and Simone was at my mother's, and the only people on the street were the two of us and the box of books between us. I know, he said. I know that now. He stepped back. He let me put the books in the car. He let me close the trunk. He stood on the front steps and watched me get in the driver's seat and start the engine. I did not look back when I pulled out, but I knew he was there. He was always there. That was the thing I was afraid of, and that was the thing I could not name, and that was the thing that, if I had named it, might have kept me from losing everything I was afraid of losing. I was afraid he would stop seeing me. He never stopped. I stopped trusting that he would keep going. That is the honest accounting. That is the full picture. That is the thing the mirror shows every morning when the east light comes through the window, and I make my coffee and I look at Simone's map on the wall and see the yellow dot at the center of all the important dots. I am the yellow dot. I am trying to be worthy of the color she chose. I am still looking at the mirror. I have not looked away. That is all I have to say. That is enough. That is for today, everything. Acknowledgement. There is one more thing I want to say, and it is not part of the story in the way the other parts are. It is a thing I want to say directly to anyone who recognizes themselves in what I have described. If you are maintaining an inventory stop, not because the items in the inventory are necessarily wrong, some of them may be accurate observations about real shortfalls in a real relationship. But because the inventory is a substitute for the conversation, and the conversation is the only thing that can actually change the situation, the inventory changes nothing except your capacity to justify what you are about to do. If you are lonely in your marriage, say so. Not in a fight. Not during a moment of accumulated resentment when the saying will come out as an accusation. In a quiet moment with the language of need rather than blame. I need something I'm not getting. I am scared we are becoming something I don't want us to become. I need you to hear me say this. I know this is frightening. I know the fear of asking is real. And I know the fear of being told no is real. And I know that the specific vulnerability of saying to the person you love, I need more from you, is one of the most exposed positions a human being can occupy. I know this because I chose for 2 years every available alternative to occupying it. The alternatives cost more than the vulnerability would have. The inventory cost more. The affair cost more. The silence cost more. Ask for what you need. Before the distance becomes the default. Before the inventory becomes the substitute. Before the distance needs a name that is not, I haven't asked for what I need. That is the thing I know. I am not qualified to give advice about anything else. I am barely qualified to give advice about this. But I am the person who did not ask, and I know what the not asking built. And I know what it cost. And if anything in this story is worth carrying out into the world, it is this. Say the thing, the true thing, to the person you chose, before the mirror shows you the version of yourself that chose otherwise. That is all. That is the story. The east window is lit. The map is on the wall. Simone's yellow dot is at the center of all the important things. I am still here. I am still looking. I am still on the map. That has to be enough to start from. That is enough to start from. Begin. The Tuesday before Christmas. 2 months before I finished writing this on a Tuesday in late November, I picked Simone up from after school, and we walked to the coffee shop as we always did, and she showed me the project she had been working on in art class, which was a mixed media piece about Holmes' photographs and drawings and text combined into a single large piece that the class had been building over the month. Her piece had the apartment on 15th Avenue, the house she lives in with Marcus, the community centre with the north-facing skylights, the coffee shop, the route between them. At the centre, she had placed 2 photographs side by side. One was of Marcus and her taken at the opening of his building in November, both of them looking up at something above the camera with the same tilt to the head. One was of me and her taken at the community centre painting studio, both of us looking at the skylights. Below the photographs she had written in her careful printing a sentence. The sentence was, "My family lives in different places and all the places are on my map." I looked at the piece for a long time. Then I looked at my daughter. "The teacher said it was the best in the class," she said. Not with false modesty, with the specific confidence of a person who has assessed the work accurately and trusts the assessment. "It is very good," I said. "Do you like it?" "I love it," I said. "Can I have it when the project is finished?" She considered. "I want it for my room, but I'll make you a copy." She did. She made me a copy that Saturday. At Marcus's house, he let her use the colour printer, and she brought it to me the following Tuesday in the coffee shop. I have it framed next to the map on the wall by the east-facing window. My family lives in different places, and all the places are on my map. That is not the ending I would have written. That is the ending that is actually here. My daughter made it for me, and it is honest and it is hers. I will try to be worthy of it. Every Tuesday, every morning with the east light, every time I make the coffee and look at the maps on the wall and understand what I had and what I chose and what I am building with what remains. The mirror is there. I am still looking. That is how it starts. Every day. That is how it starts. And one more thing, which is the smallest thing and also the truest. Marcus still puts dahlias in the kitchen window on Saturdays. Simone has told me this several times without editorial comment, as a simple fact of her father's Saturday routine. Yellow ones, because he knows I like yellow. He has never said this to me directly. He says it through the dahlias, and through Simone's reports, and through the map that his daughter made for her art project, where both houses are important dots, connected by a route that she drew with the curved lines that mean the path goes the way it has to go, not the straight way, the real way. He is still putting the dahlias in the window. I am still the yellow dot on the map. We are both still on the map. That is the only kind of ending that is actually available to any of us, which is not an ending at all, but a continuation in a different form. I am continuing. He is continuing. Simone is drawing us both into every map she makes. That is where we are. That is the story. I am still looking at the mirror. The east window is lit. The dahlias are yellow. The map says what it says. Begin. The apartment on 15th Avenue has been mine for 2 years now. The east window lets in the morning light. The maps are on the wall. Simone's neighborhood map with the yellow dot, the copy of the school art project. The small sketch she made of the painting studio in the community center. 3 maps, 3 different versions of the same story, all of them made by a 6-year-old who was paying closer attention than anyone. I make my coffee and I look at them every morning, and I understand what I had and what I chose and what I am building with what remains. The path goes the way it has to go, not the straight way, the real way. I am on the path. I am still on the path. I am still looking at the mirror. The light is still coming through the east window. The important dots are still there. That is enough. That is more than enough. That is every morning the beginning. Begin, begin, begin. This is where the story ends. Not with a clean resolution or a redeemed protagonist or a marriage restored to its best version. With a woman who got it wrong and knows how she got it wrong and is building something honest from the materials that remain. With a daughter who put her mother at the center of every map she made, even when she had every reason to move the dot. With a man who kept yellow dahlias in the window because someone he loved liked yellow, and he had not stopped paying attention even when he had every reason to. With a coffee shop on a Tuesday afternoon and a 6-year-old showing her mother a drawing of 2 houses connected by a curved line that means the path goes the way it has to go. That is the ending that is actually here. I did not earn it. I am trying to be worthy of it. The mirror is there. The light is coming in. The map is on the wall. That is all. That is everything. That is where we are. Begin.